Viewers, you are welcome to our favorite program, Eyewitness. As you know by now, this is a program that has conversations with Nigerians who have contributed significantly to promoting the public good. People who have contributed to their communities, people who have worked hard to leave their community, their country, and the world better than they found it. We are really astonished since we started this program at the very large number of Nigerians that can be placed in that category of promoters of the public good, as against the normal stories we hear every day about corrupt public servants, about self-aggrandizement, about ruining your economy, your community, and your society. In continuation of our program, today we are addressing an issue, an event that occurred over 100 years ago, and that is the Satiru Revolt that occurred that ended in 1906 in Sokoto. There's a sense in which it was really about a major social movement developing just before colonization and was ended with the colonial occupation. And that maybe such an event has important lessons for us in contemporary Nigeria. Our guest today is Malam Abubakar Sokoto Mohammed, who is a lecturer in not Ahmadu Bello University, sorry, in Danfodio University in Sokoto. But before then, he had been a lecturer in Ahmadu Bello University, and he will talk to us a bit about his background and how he came here. Malam Abubakar, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Professor Jibrin Ibrahim, and our viewers. I'm happy to be here to share my experience and my background and my contribution to the public good, as Jibo put it. First of all, I was born in Sokoto in the year 1950, and of course went to primary school in Sokoto. Specifically, I went to a school. I went to two schools at the same time. Western primary school called RCM, Roman Catholic Mission Primary School in Sokoto. It's called the Holy Family School. But when the government took over the schools, it was renamed Marafadambaba Primary School. And at the same time, I was also attending Nizamiya Islamia Primary School, Islamia School in Sokoto. I attended one in the morning and attended the other one in the afternoon. And of course, from there, I went to the provincial secondary school in Sokoto, which were established, of course, by the Northern Nigerian government, and in the year 1964. And while I was there, the school underwent a lot of transformation from provincial secondary school. It became government secondary school. It became government college. And now, following the motto of the school, it has been renamed Nagarta College, just like the Rumfa College in Kano. And of course, I did my higher school certificate after WAEC there. And from then, I did some teaching at the Sokoto Teachers College in 1971, before advancing to Ahmadu Bello University.
Tell us a bit about the Sokoto of your primary school. How was life? What struck you about life in the late 50s and in the 1960s?
Well, at that time, we had what I would want to call as a sociologist a stable society, in the sense that things were well organized and things were done, efficiently, and also on a large extent on merit. You found people from poor families and poor background who were given opportunities to, compete with others and also to excel. And, at that time, the NA system was there. And of course, the regional government was there. And the administration was well organized. Things were smooth, so to say.
I'm surprised in Bindin Shehu you went to a Catholic primary school.
Yes.
How do you explain that?
Well, the explanation is simple, because my father was an ex-serviceman. He was in the Royal West African Frontier Force. And at that time, when he was discharged from the army and went back to Sokoto, the house where we stayed was closer to the Roman Catholic Mission School than the other schools that we had then, the NA schools. They were farther away. And also a choice of quality also. He believed the quality will get there because we were paying fees, whereas in the other schools they were not paying fees, would be advantageous. And I think it has really worked out, because I took the common entrance exam before the final year. At that time we spent 7 years.
Yes.
But I took the exam from the 6th year and went to the provincial secondary school. And interestingly, people also are always amazed that much as I attended a mission school, I am also good in Arabic and Islamic studies.
Because you combined both.
I combined both, yes. I combined both.
That's really interesting. But life in Sokoto at that time, apart from the stability,
yes,
what was the social scene like?
Well, the social
How would you differentiate it from today?
From today, well, as I said at that time, there were people, of course, from other parts of the country living in Sokoto at that time, and they pursued their own businesses, and they did their own work. Nobody cared about them. Even when the Civil War took place, there's the story that people left their houses, and when they came back, the houses were handed over to them, along with the rents that were collected. So that's part of the fairness of the system at that time. And of course, it was before the introduction of the Sharia, and life was really on the more, well, I wouldn't say wild, but people were, engaged in, there were a lot of drinking houses, there were a lot of brothels, there was horse racing, polo, of course, a lot of social activities which later became controlled by the Sharia, and of course the political activities also at that time. The NPC was the dominant party, and of course Sokoto was the home of Ahmadu Bello, and the other parties were not very present, but they were there. They had their own members. Yes.
Okay, so let's jump from life in Sokoto as a kid to Ahmadu Bello University.
Yes.
The transition, having spent all your life in Sokoto,
yes,
to Zaria, which
yes,
was more cosmopolitan,
yes,
more educated, a better society.
Yes.
How did you find that?
Well, the transition to Zaria wasn't really very abrupt, because luckily for me, my background has exposed me to different places. Incidentally, my mother comes from Kano, from a village in Dambata local government. So I used to go to Kano for holidays. I had an uncle also who was in the army. He was in the Nigerian Army depot in Zaria. That again exposed me to Zaria, to traveling. And I wouldn't be called, an unexposed person, so to say. And luckily, when you go with people also from your own state, and you meet other young people of the same interest. So that enabled us to blend. And at that time there was this youthful energy to engage in, studying. And at that time, the education we had scholarship, and things were very orderly, and we didn't have anything to bother about. We had the cafeteria where we ate. They did laundry for us. So all you needed to do was to go and study. You go to the library, you are giving your scholarship allowance, you remember, because it was big and jumbo. We used to call it Bulgaria, yes, in ABU, and you bought whatever you wanted. You bought books, of course, there was book allowance. So there wasn't much problem, really, so to say.
At that time, students in Ahmadu Bello University used to wear platform shoes,
Yes.
6 inches high.
That's right.
I hope you had your
I did.
platform shoes.
I did wear some, and jeans, of course. We both
Yes.
use. The shop is still there in Zaria, I believe, where we spent our allowances.
Harmony
shop, you know.
Yes.
We went and bought the most trendy shirts and jeans and the platform shoes and the bell-bottom trousers,
Yes.
you know, which were the fashion at that time. Of course, we engaged also in social activities. You know, there were clubs where there was music, people went to dance over the weekend and so on.
Well, I hope you didn't partake in that.
No. Well, it's part of the youthful experience.
Yes,
Yes.
but let's talk a bit about what struck you about Ahmadu Bello University when you got there. I do know that radicalism had already started
Yes.
in ABU when you got there.
Yeah.
How did you engage that, or how did that engage you?
Actually, I went to ABU at the time of transition, so to say. When I went there, most of our major...
Which year was that?
1972. At that time, most of our professors and a lot of our lecturers were either English or American. So it was while we were there, when I came back after the NYSC, that there was this change after 1975. There was change in the curriculum, and then also there was change in the leadership, so to say, of the university at that time. So I saw the change. You know, of course, we students were part of the demand for the change. For example, in sociology, we had a course on the history of sociological thought, and all we were taught were Western philosophers. And we raised issues. And there are any African philosophers? And we demanded, yes, there are some of them that we wanted to be included in our curriculum. And that was how it started. And eventually, with the change of the leadership, most of the Western professors left. And the place was Africanized and Nigerianized. And of course, you know, it was a period also of the struggle for the liberation of Africa.
Yes.
Yes. So, and of course, ABU, Student Union Movement, was very strong. Along with the young lecturers, we pushed to form even associations that will, you know, impact on the society. Yes.
That was a time of study groups, radical study groups. What was your experience of that?
Well, I belong to one of them. This was the movement for a progressive Nigeria. It was called MPN. And the background to it was that before then, there were different organizations. There was one called STAR, Social Theory and Africa Reality, and there was another one we called the Grand African Movement, Grand African Movement or Grand Common African Movement, you know, for the liberation of Africa. So we brought the two together and formed the MP and the Movement for Progressive Nigeria. And this was a movement that was ideologically slanted towards, of course, socialism and Marxism, and it brought students from all over the country, irrespective of tribe, ethnic and religious backgrounds, together, and we took up issues in the nation against military rule, against structural adjustment program, and because the change in the syllabus was such that our knowledge and education was supposed to be first and foremost for the service of our society, our country, our continent, and then the rest of humanity. And this was what informed the radicalism at that time. Yes.
Having been a very good student of the Islamia school and now going to ABU, joining a Marxist study group,
yeah.
How did you feel that transition? Did you feel you are betraying your background?
No, I didn't. Interestingly, I was able to, you know, combine the two because I never abandoned my religious practices and beliefs, because the struggle for socialism is for humanity.
Yes.
And you will find a lot of course, most of that in Islam. And I never abandoned I never believed that to be a socialist or Marxist, you have to abandon your religious background. I combined the two to the best of my ability.
Okay, that's
Yes.
great.
Yes.
So our topic today is lessons from the Satiru Revolt.
Yes.
A lot of our viewers wouldn't know what that's about. Maybe if you could just start by telling us about what that was all about, so that we have a context for the discussion.
Satiru is the name of a village to the south of Sokoto today, which doesn't exist anymore. And there is a long explanation to that. Satiru was a movement, a social movement, so to say, which started in about 1894, before the arrival of the British. And it was a movement that was led by some Islamic scholars. And they were poor Islamic scholars who were against the aristocracy in Sokoto. They were opposed to slavery. They were opposed to forced labor. And they also wanted, within the context of the ideology of Mahdism, there was the belief in Islam that every 100 years a Mahdi will come to liberate the society. And they operated within that context. So they decided to set up a settlement of their own. And the people who came to them, who listened to their, so to say, propaganda, were mostly slaves and poor peasants. The slaves left their masters, and the peasants also ran away from their own masters and came to establish the village. At the height of the village, it was said to be about 10,000 people. And they came with their families also. And they established a town called Satiru, a village, so to say. And actually, when the British came, the then Sultan Satiru II, was the one who informed them of the existence of the village, that there is a very troublesome village. We want to inform you so that when they revolt, you won't accuse us of instigating them, And the British decided to go and find out what is happening there. Actually, the surrounding villages were places where the Satiru Malams and their members went to campaign to draw more members. And they had a dispute with one village called Omau, and they attacked and killed some people in the village. And the British resident then and other officers decided to go and find out what is this village and what is happening there. And when they went, 3 of them were killed. Right today, when you go to the cemetery, the Christian cemetery in Sokoto, you'll find their graves there with their names inscribed. And that forced them to come back and regroup. And
so that was which year?
It was same 1906.
1906.
That's 1906, of course, after the defeat of Sokoto in 1903. So when they came back, the Sokoto aristocracy said, well, they can deal with these people, They are very recalcitrant. They made an effort to go and attack Satiru, and the Satiru people repelled them, woefully. They defeated the Sokoto forces woefully. Yes, and then the British said, no, this is not an easy matter. Lugard particularly said a lesson must be made of Satiru so that other people will learn to be loyal to the British Empire. And of course, there was a large mobilization from other towns, Kano, Lokoja, Kaduna, to all mass up in Satiru and attack the town. And
well, before we go to the sacking of Satiru, let's just go back a bit.
Okay.
The jihad had occurred. It had brought a system of justice that had addressed the injustices of the past. How come at this time, at the end of the 19th century, there was this social movement expressing dissatisfaction with the way in which life was run in the Sokoto Caliphate?
Well, before the British arrival, there were a lot of problems with the Caliphate. Especially, there were a lot of misrule, a lot of, grievances. So to say, wherever you find peasant or slave revolts taking place, they are based on grievances. And sometimes there are natural factors also, such as famine, that come into play a very important role. So this was the situation. Before the arrival of the British, things had definitely gone down, unlike at the very beginning of the establishment of the Caliphate. So this was why this kind of movement could rise. And Sokoto is a place where there were a lot of slave settlements on the farms of the aristocrats, because all the emirates had to come each year to pay tribute And the tributes were paid in slaves, horses, money, grains, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so let's go back to where you were about the massive mobilization to attack Satiru. So was that successful?
Yeah, it was. In fact, it was what I would call an overkill, because in fact, you know, as Lugard said, they won because they had the Maxim gun. They had guns, and they used, of course, some of our African members in their forces to attack the village. And what they did was to attack the village, and the villagers came out to confront them. And members of the village were actually wiped out. The only people that were left were the women and young children, those that were not matured, so to say, you know, that have not reached adulthood. But even after killing all the people in the village, for about 3 days, there were hot pursuits of people who tried to run away. And the Sultan also put a curse on the village that nobody should farm or live in the place again because of their bad attitude.
What was the bad attitude?
Of course, of rebellion, of rebellion to constituted authority.
Okay.
Both the Caliphate and the British. And Lugard himself said that Satiru was significant in the sense that if they had succeeded, British colonialism would not have taken place in Nigeria. So that is why it was so important to set an example with them.
What's surprising about this story is the fact that both the British conquerors and the Caliphate leaders were agreed on wiping out this community. Isn't that surprising?
Oh, it's not surprising. You, as a political scientist, should know the basis of the indirect rule system. You know, the Lugard made a statement when Sokoto was conquered that now the British are the ones who will appoint all political leaders. Then also the British will determine which taxes should be collected and what portion of the tax should go to the aristocrats and what should go to the British. So this is why, in my own interpretation, there were a lot of interpretations of the Satiru Revolt before my own study. Some gave it an ethnic interpretation, some gave it a religious interpretation, and so on. But at the end of the day, I said it was a class interpretation. And this is what explains why the aristocracy will come together with the British and the slaves will come together with the peasants.
So the class dimension was really, really strong.
It was. In fact, this work is quoted internationally as the first study to give a class interpretation to the revolt.
Well, that's actually why we thought you should come and share this study you did all these years ago. I think you finished the study in 1983?
Right.
Yeah, so that's quite some time. I hope it's been published and people can
right now,
it.
my vice chancellor in Usman Danfodio University, Professor Lawal Suleiman Bilbis, on the orders of the TED Fund, they were requesting for manuscripts of high quality that could be published. And I'm working on getting it published.
Oh, that'll be great.
In fact, the deadline we have is before December.
Okay.
Yes.
So what were the consequences of the annihilation? I think that's not a strong word.
That's right.
Of Satiru.
Yes.
What were the consequences?
Well, the consequences was that then British rule was established. You know, it was a clearing ground for establishing British rule and for the subjects to behave properly, pay their taxes. Forced labor they had to, of course, carry out under the colonial rule, and also they have to obey the traditional rulers at that time. And as Lugard said, but for the annihilation of Satiru, establishment of British Empire in Nigeria would have been a big problem. If you remember, Sokoto was the last place to be conquered. And another important significant thing is the myth that in the north the British were welcome. You know, it's not true, because Satiru proves the contrary. Yes, yes.
Let's talk about the Mahdist tradition. Yes. Some months ago, we had Professor Kher Mohammed, who spoke about the Mahdist movement in Borno.
Yes.
At about the same time as the one you are talking about in Sokoto.
Yes.
This was all over 100 years ago. Every 100 years there's supposed to be a new Mahdi.
That's
so
right.
how come it's over 100 years and no more Mahdi has emerged?
Well, you cannot tell. You cannot tell. In fact, at that time, not only in Sokoto against the British, but even in Niger, there was a movement against the French. In Cameroon also, there was a movement against the Germans. And of course, you know, in Sudan also, there was the Mahdi of the Sudan.
Yes.
Yes. And incidentally, they found it quite useful to utilize the Mahdist ideology for anti-colonial resistance.
Well, in the case of Borno, the point Professor Carey was making was that Rabe himself was very brutal against the people.
Yeah.
And that gave the excuse, as it were, to the colonial forces to mobilize against him. But the difference in terms of Satiru is that these were simply expressing their difference with the political system then existing.
That's right.
And did not set out to oppress any person in particular.
No, they did in a way, because they attacked and burnt and a lot of settlements around them who refused to join them. You know, they did in some way. This is why they became notorious. You know, they went to village markets to propagate their ideas, and also whichever settlement refused to support them, they just burnt it. A lot of towns were sacked around the settlement, you know, and people, in fact, have to desert some of their own settlements in fear of the Satiru people. Yes.
So is there any other legacy of Satiru that is still observable in Sokoto today?
Yes, right now I am supervising a student who is doing a master's on what he called the aftermath of the Satiru. And it's interesting that he's finding a lot of settlements where descendants of the Satirawa, we call them Satirawa, are living today. And they're holding up to now to their anti-Western ideology. Many of them, they don't want to drink water from the pipe. They don't want to put on watches. They also don't want to go to Western schools. And their attitude towards the authority is a kind of reserved, not open rebellion, so to say, but uncooperative. Yes.
So it has some ideological similarities with the Netes Ine movement of the 1980s in terms of rejecting Western culture.
Yes, they do. Because, you know, it is against the Western Empire of the British.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, viewers, I think we'll take a short break now, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, viewers. We are still with Abubakar Sokoto Mohammed, a lecturer in Danfodiyo University in Sokoto, with whom we've been discussing the Satiru Revolt of 1906, what led to it, the consequences, the annihilation of the Said community, and subsequently the social peace that has reigned in Sokoto. Can one say over the past 100 years since Satiru, there has been social peace in Sokoto? How would you explain the situation?
Yeah, one would say there has been social peace. Of course, there is the colonial order in operation along with the native authority system. And you know, at that time, of course, the Sultan and the emirs, and they had the reins of power before the military came and took over. So that has ensured stability. You know, the emirs had the prisons, they had the police, they had the courts, and those were used to, of course, maintain stability in the society, so to say. Yes.
But other places like Kano, Zaria, for example,
Yes.
had radical movements in the 1960s and 70s,
Yes.
such as the Nepu Sawaba movement. Sokoto is another world, isn't it?
Yeah, it is another world because that was the seat of the caliphate. And of course, you know, the premier of northern Nigeria at that time, Sir Ahmadu Bello, is from the royal family of the caliphate. He was the leader of the NPC. So people in Sokoto felt NPC was their party. And of course, Nepu was associated with some kind of radicalism, rudeness, and untoward behavior. In fact, there is a story that there were some few Nepu people, of course, in Sokoto, and Gusau, and other areas, that in Tsafe, which was the entrance to Sokoto province, people who came with their bushy hair were normally shaved before they got into Sokoto to show that you have to be disciplined. And incidentally, these were some of the Nepu people, you know. And of course, majority of the people were peasants, and the others were workers in the native authority. And of course, you didn't have the kind of people who had independence that could have their own political options outside the mainstream system. I believe this is what explains it.
So to use the maybe phraseology of Antonio Gramsci,
Yes.
the Sokoto Caliphate expressed its hegemony fully in Sokoto,
Yes.
unlike in some of the other far-flung parts of the Caliphate.
That's true. That's true. And that's true. And also, Islamic education did play a very important role, because at one time when the Boko Haram was taking place in Borno, we tried to explain that the difference is their own understanding of the Islamic religion, which of course was not the same with the understanding in the Sokoto area, in the sense that people, of course, internalized the behavior expected of them as subjects, whereas there people probably were more concerned about cramming the Quran rather than internalizing the other etiquette and behavior that is expected of a Muslim.
Well, I don't know what Borno scholars will say to you. There has been this long arguments between Borno and Sokoto in terms of the Islamic culture and tradition.
That's right.
But people in Borno will point out they have a much older and more entrenched Islamic culture than we had in the Sokoto Caliphate.
That's right. Well, you know, the Sokoto Caliphate was a reformist and revivalist movement, and that was the point. Of course, when the jihad was taking place and the Sokoto forces went to Borno, the Borno people, you know, there was a long correspondence between Muhammadu Bello and Al-Kanemi. The Al-Kanemi said, when you people came, you prayed in mosques. They said, yes, but you people are mixing the religion with some un-Islamic practices, and this is why it needed to be purified. So this was the explanation. Of course, Borno even claims to have had Islam before Sokoto. But the issue
is it a claim?
Of course.
I thought it was a historical fact.
Well, you know, some of the things are debatable. Sometimes people, to score a point, will want to make some claims.
Okay, I don't want a war between Sokoto and Borno.
Well, even yesterday you noticed it at the conference, you know.
Yes, this was the conference by the alumni
Association of National Institute.
Yes,
you know, between the representative of the governor and His Eminence the Sultan.
Yes, that was a very interesting thing. But just to conclude on this issue of 100 years later, when you look at much of northern Nigeria,
Yes.
there has been a lot of social upheavals,
Yes.
either of a religious nature or political nature or ethnic. But Sokoto has really been out of that. Is it all due to this acceptance, as you put it, of this culture of obedience?
Yes, partly so, but now, of course, there is the problem of banditry. And that one also is, of course, normally people try to justify what they do. And they claim there are a lot of injustices against them, and they are denied participation in the system. A lot of apparatus of the system are ganged up against them. You know, the security agencies, the judiciary, even the traditional rulers. You know, but otherwise, things would have been normal. You know, for example, they are not making any political claims, unlike the Satiru people. The Satiru people wanted political power, but now people are just asking for, for their own, for their own rights to be respected. You know.
Well, let's discuss a bit the forthcoming elections. Yesterday, you hosted a large number of dignitaries and ordinary Nigerians to a discussion on the forthcoming 2023 elections, and in particular, some of the issues that need to be addressed to ensure that these elections are not only credible but also peaceful.
Yes.
What struck you really about the concerns people have about the forthcoming elections of 2023?
Well, the concerns that people express is, one, about the quality of leadership that we have. That definitely there is a need to improve on the recruitment process of the political class in Nigeria. People do not have the requisite qualifications and training, or even attitude to, quest for political power, because people tend to be unaccountable and also irresponsive to the needs of the people. And definitely that is a very important point in terms of electing people into offices, and the need for the system also to be transparent and to be credible and acceptable, because you find that sometimes people say that justice and the political office go to the highest bidder, and that is a very major concern. That right now people are asking for the government to fund political parties. This didn't happen in the First Republic. You know, the point is that people are just there for what they can make. Then there are certain national issues that militate against our unity. For example, the indigenship citizenship dichotomy, which needs to be properly addressed. There are the issues of the fact that we have abandoned development planning, which were the cornerstone of the progress we had in the First Republic of socio-economic and infrastructure development. But luckily, we are told that we are going back to development planning again now. Then also there is the issue of socio-economic inequalities. As somebody pointed out, in Nigeria today, if you are not rich, you cannot take care of your health, you cannot get a good education, you can also not get justice. These are issues of concern, and the hope is that when the elections take place, we should be able to address these issues.
But you know, when you castigate Nigeria's leadership,
Yes.
we're in a democracy. It's the
Yes.
people who elect these leaders.
Yes.
They elect those they want.
Yes.
So on what basis do you question that choice of the people?
Yeah, the issue is that even from the parties, the way the parties are organized, people say that it is the money bags who control the parties. In the past, it didn't used to be so. With NEPU, with the other parties. Of course, there were figures in the parties that, helped in mobilizing people. But money wasn't an issue. Otherwise, people like Aminu Kano would not have contested and won elections to the assembly, you know. So this is the major concern, and it has to do also with the quality. It is your money that determines, not your quality. For example, I've always given an example with Britain and US, and it's correct to do this because, first of all, we borrowed the system from them, and the way they are practicing it is not the way we are practicing it. For example, I made a study that about the 9 past prime ministers of the United Kingdom are either products of Oxford or Cambridge. The latest prime minister that was sworn in by the Queen before she died is a product of Oxford. Even Boris, that people didn't take serious, is a product of Oxford. And here in Nigeria,
they are well trained.
Exactly. They had careers. They worked in the party before they rose to be leaders of the party and to contest for the leadership of the country. And this is the kind of thing we want in Nigeria. You know, the same with the US. People are products of the Ivy League universities. It's either Harvard or Yale or Princeton. Because you have to give the best to lead you. Blind people cannot lead, the rest of the society.
So how did we get it wrong? At what point?
Some people said there are 2 issues that have really distorted the development of Nigeria. One was the advent of oil. With oil, we abandoned production and we emphasized sharing. So money became an important issue in society, which before then wasn't. And secondly, is the issue of military intervention. Our federal system worked very well in the First Republic, but with the military, of course, there is central command, and everything was virtually over-centralized. And there was uniformity instead of unity in diversity, which the First Republic tried to practice. And I believe this is where we really derailed. Yes.
Well, part of Nigeria's attitude to addressing the leadership question has been the setting up of the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies, where members of the civilian class, as it were, with members of security forces, all come in to undergo highest level of training and preparation. How come that that's not a trajectory to produce leadership for the country?
Well, it is, but it is too little and too what is the appropriate word? Too little and not sufficient to make an impact. But where members of the National Institute had opportunity, they have demonstrated their capabilities. The best example that comes up now is the governor of Borno State, His Excellency Zulum. Umara Zulum. He's making a difference. Everybody has attested to that. And we believe it's not unconnected with his training in Kuru. We had our own comrade Adams Oshimole, who was a governor in Edo State. He also made some impact. We had, in fact, the first MNI governor was Malam Yahya Abdul Karim in Sokoto. He also made his own impact. And also in Jigawa State now, you also have Governor Badaru Abubakar. And they are not the same with the others because there's a difference in their style. But the issue is that we are too few. In fact, given the over 40 years of the establishment of Kuru, up till today, you don't have up to 3,000 members of the National Institute. Of course, the Sultan is another example. In fact, among the traditional rulers, we have many examples. The Oba of Lagos, the Obi of Onisha, the Emir of Gondu, and the Emir of Zuru, and there are many others I can mention.
You are both a directing staff, but also a product of the National Institute. When do we expect to see you in power?
No. Well, people have always asked me what is my vocation, and I say I'm a scholar. I don't have any political ambitions. I want to remain a scholar all my life.
Okay, not everybody needs to be a leader.
Well, you give leadership, you give ideas, you give support, you even do some consultancy in training people. That's a form of contribution.
Yes.
I believe you remember there was a time we organized a retreat for the government of Sokoto State at the National Institute Kuru. And that made a lot of impact because many of the recommendations that came out of that were implemented. And they improved the art of governance in the state.
When you compare your life as a scholar in Ahmadu Bello University and subsequently as a directing staff at the National Institute, which one marks you the most?
They are all important to me. Why? Because the work in ABU prepared me for what I went to do in Kuru. I was initially appointed as a senior fellow in the research department, and eventually I rose to be the acting director of research before I retired. But not only that, they also found me useful in many other departments. I was a directing staff in the Department of Studies. I was the institute editor also. You remember I went and worked with the media in Sokoto.
Yes.
I was appointed from Kuru to go and be the general manager to establish a state newspaper. And that made Kuru to think that I can do well as an editor in publishing the works of the institute. And I was also made a director of coordination, monitoring, and evaluation, which never existed in the structure of Kuru. But of course, it was a temporary appointment. And I find both of them actually complementary. The other one was more or less purely academic, but this one was more or less policy oriented, you know, in terms of the work we do, training people, and also the travels to learn from the experiences of other countries.
Yesterday, I think it was the Sultan that was making the argument that we've had many committees work on policy proposals. We've done excellent work, and these recommendations never get implemented to change the reality on the ground. What can we do moving forward to enhance the system's capacity to implement proposed policies and make them functional?
Well, I believe the problem has to do with the quality of the leadership that we have again. You know, the minimum qualification, of course, is the school certificate. When you bring issues of policy, and now there are vested interests also. If they don't tally with the interests of the people in power, of course, they will keep them aside to gather dust. But when you have people that are more qualitative in terms of their background, I think they will appreciate these policy recommendations and push for their implementation because they will make a difference.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, we are just a few months to the 2023 elections. Some people are excited, some people are afraid. What's your own attitude? Are you a pessimist or an optimist in terms of the elections?
I'm a permanent optimist in Nigeria. The Nigerian project, many of us believe in Nigeria, and we believe it's a country that ought to be a world power, but for the quality of our leadership. We have people all over the world that have proved their case. God has endowed us with all the resources that you need to make a country great, and we cannot afford to be pessimistic. We have gone through a lot of problems, even much serious, more than we've gone through a civil war, we've gone through military rule, and yet we were all able to survive. We've gone through Ebola, we've gone through Corona, and I'm still optimistic that Nigeria will come out on top. In the leadership role we are supposed to give Africa and other countries, the qualities and the potentials are there, but we want them to be realized. That is why we'll continue to believe in the Nigerian project.
I think we'll close on this very positive note of optimism about the Nigeria project. Thank you so much, Abubakar Sokoto Mohammed, for taking us through your life history, the event that was so important in the history of this part of the world, the Satiru Revolt, and what has happened to policy spaces over the last few decades. I think there's a lot of food for thought in what you have said. And we close with your optimism that the Nigeria project is ongoing. And if we all continue with our commitment, the future can be bright. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, that was very good.